Hello, hi everyone. Before we begin with the session today, we will just address the questions from the last session, which was appraising evidence. We received a couple of questions and we have noted them. Nareen, would you like to take over and answer those? Over to you.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all. Well, thank you for joining us on our fifth session, module 4 today on synthesizing evidence that will be led by Bhavika today. Good to see you. Can you please put your cameras on so I can see you all there? Great. Thank you. Let me just mention this, that I have looked into your assignments and all the discussions. It's amazing and it's so exciting to hear from you. You are so engaged. I love it. I love the spirit of your engagement and making sure you are able to propose or change better policies in your countries. Really, it's rewarding for me to have people like you here, so that we are able to build a better countries, respect decent work issues and promote social justice. That's our motto here. That's our DNA, as I was mentioning. So thank you for guiding us on that, and your the discussions that you have posted on the discussion forum. It's great. But also your assignments. I mean, I was just going through this morning, and I think you are really into it and really bringing out very substantive and important issues. So well done on that. Please keep the spirit there, keep the momentum, because now is the time. If you lose the momentum, or those who have not followed so far, will be difficult for them to follow. You know, I have a boy. You know, he's 16 years old now. His name is Eshan. You know, he when he was 7 years old, in his school assignment, he was asked to do an exhibition on a topic that he was most passionate and he loved the topic. So he comes to me and says, what topic should I decide? A 7-year-old boy at that time, he knows everything about dinosaurs, right? Dinosaurs. He loves them. He knows everything. So I said, you do your dinosaur stuff. So then we had a school break, 1 week break. Then he was supposed to do the exhibition when the school resumed. So during the holiday, he did nothing, played with neighbors and friends. And when comes the weekend before the school, he started to prepare his dinosaur project, right? An exhibition. Although he was an expert, he knew everything, like what time, what period, the size, the height, the weight, the babies, the eggs, everything. And in that 2 days of preparing his exhibition, he did a okay job. So when he showed it to the school and we, the parents, went to see the exhibition, it was not that great compared to what he knew, because he took it very late. And therefore, he did a very sloppy job. That's why I don't want you guys doing a dinosaur project of my son, where you are experts in your field, you know the issues, you are passionate about that. Please do it now. If not, it will be too late, and you'll do a not a great job after, and you will be frustrated, we'll be frustrated, everybody will be frustrated, because I know you guys are experts and passionate about that. So please continue the momentum, as I mentioned. Finish the assignments. Today will be, I think now we are getting more technical these days in our assignments. Like today, you'll be more technical assignments in terms of synthesizing, writing stuffs. And the next week will be even more in terms of going to the research issues and looking into abstract and really comparing research. So now it's getting a little bit technical, and I really trust you so that you are able to produce finest policy briefs that you have ever written. We'd be happy to guide you. All right, with that, I think I had a few questions that was posted on the evaluation form. Ryan, you mentioned about some research question. I mean, I did not get very well. Maybe you want to explain yourself, your question. What was your question about? How would you appraise? What type of research question is most relevant? I was not able to really get that question. If you can just explain to us. Thank you. Ryan? Yeah, no, maybe okay. Let's go while we're waiting for Ryan to connect and get. I mean, Rokas, these are 2.5 hour sessions. Okay, you mentioned how long are the session is 2.5 hours. And there was another question about unclear. Shane mentions there's unclear areas centered around
Sorry,
what is.
Naren, just to inform you that Ryan has a problem with the microphone. But maybe I kindly ask you to, if you can write down the answer. Okay, no, okay, the approach that we could take it to answer. That was your answer, Ryan. Okay, so the answer to your question, Naren, was the approach that we could take it to answer. This was the answer to your question for Naren.
Okay,
Ryan.
okay. Right, we'll come back to that one. So what is the relevance? What is the difference between relevance and objectivity? Well, relevance is when we talk about relevance, when you appraise the evidence, it's about relevant to your own policy question. What are you trying to find? Whether the materials you got, is it relevant for you to answer your policy question, right? That was the thing that Shane had asked. I think Yosina also asked difference between relevance and quality. The quality is when you go behind the evidence and see how the evidence was produced. What is the research method, or what is the sample size, where was it published, all those things, the quality of the product itself, how it was produced. Whereas relevance is relevance in terms of your own policy question. That was the question from Yosina from Indonesia. And of course, Sarah had asked that I had a discussion with her through email in terms of maybe we are using too much of Western evidence that is produced by the Western countries, developed countries, and not taking too much into account the local, the knowledge or evidence generated from developing countries. I totally take that comment very well, and we are trying our best to make sure that we also use local evidence. That's why I use also your local newspapers and publications from your local researchers. We will be having some examples from them later on. Absolutely, Sarah, I totally agree with you. So those were a few questions that I saw in your evaluations. If you have any other questions on appraising or any other topic, please let us know. Yeah. Any other comment? Great. No questions. So we think that we are on the right track. So today's session is, as Bhavika mentioned, we will be helping you synthesize your evidence that you have got so far. And I think today's session is one of the most important sessions, where we will give you the template for your policy briefs, how to write, what to put inside. So I think Bhavika will be taking the lead on that one. So Bhavika, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Naren. All right. So, as Naren mentioned, today is going to be one of the most exciting days of this training, because it all boils down to your policy brief at the end of this training. And today you are going to go through the differences between what is summary and what is synthesis, and what are the key elements that you need to put together to actually create a policy brief. So without further ado, I'll just share my screen and get started. All right, so here we are. This is just a brief snapshot of what we did on Wednesday, appraising evidence, what are the different components of how you can appraise the evidence that you have collected or compiled for your policy question, where we saw the different elements, relevance, quality, how do you ensure that the topic that you have selected, you are also able to find different evidence products which are also timely in nature, which are specific to the geographical location that you are writing about. So all of those different factors about evidence, how can you appraise them, all of that we have already covered. Now that we have that already uh, set aside, we can move ahead and try to get into the synthesis part of your evidence. You will realize that we are going step by step. The first step was where you searched for your evidence. That was step one. The second was where you appraise your evidence. And the third today is synthesizing the evidence that you have collected so far. Many of you had also filled the worksheet on eCampus, wherein we had requested you to write down your evidence products that you have compiled, whether you are going to use them in your policy brief, whether those are relevant for your policy question, all of those questions you had answered. So now moving a step ahead, there will also be a worksheet that you will find at the end of this course, at the end of this session, which you will be able to fill by synthesizing the evidence that you have already searched for and you have already appraised. Now, in that direction, we'll also make sure that we cover how do you write your policy recommendations and how do you make them actionable, because there could be many parts that the policy issue could touch upon. There could be many recommendations that all of you could come up with, but how many of those would be actionable, on which the stakeholders can really read the policy brief and say that yes, this is something that is implementable, that is feasible, that is actionable. So we'll also highlight that, and towards the end we'll share certain examples of how you can actually synthesize the evidence. We'll also show you an example of a policy brief from the ILO website, and outline the key elements of the policy brief for you. Now you will see that we have four steps here. The first one is interpreting the applicability, which we'll talk about right after this slide. That how do you decide that the evidence that you have collected, you have appraised, how do you determine that it is applicable to your policy question or not? After which we'll talk about the differences between summarizing and synthesizing, because there is a difference. It is not the same. Next, we'll talk about the recommendations that you will be writing. And finally, the last step, which we are all working towards, is that how will you draft your policy brief? Now, we have a quick exercise here for you all to participate in. There will be a poll that will pop up right now, and you'll see that on the left-hand side, there are four different types of evidence products. The first is brief, summary, fact sheet, and lastly, the policy paper. Now, on the right-hand side, you'll see that there are different descriptions or definitions of the evidence products written on the left. But the trick is that these are not mentioned in the right order. The colors are also not to be matched. It's not that summary is written in green, so it has to mean the one in the green which says longer and gives detailed information. It's all jumbled up. So now you can go through the poll. You can look at the options. You'll see that the labeling has been done 1, 2, 3, 4 and A, B, C, D. So how will you match the evidence product with the right definition or description given on the right? Let's look at your answers. Vincenzo? Sure, thank you. Okay, a few of you have selected second and third. We are waiting for some more. Okay, clear bias for the third one. Okay, perfect. So we have about 15 responses. We can end the poll now. And these are the results. Okay, so 11 of you, about 70% of you have answered the third one. And a couple of you have answered the first or second one. All right. Now let's see what is the right answer. The first one, which is the brief or a memo, that stands for concise standalone document focusing on a particular issue requiring policy attention. Many of you might have come across this in policy circles. This is usually floated as a single one-pager document, which is very concise in nature and it is sufficient in itself. It's a standalone document. The second is the summary. It does not include recommendations or implications for the reader, but similar to brief and outlines key information and messages from a longer body of work or synthesis in a concise format. Again, we find that when we are reading research papers, we'll come across summaries of the same. Instead of reading like 50-pager, 60-pager reports, we'll just quickly go through the summary, and that's what it explains here. The third is a fact sheet. It is the most condensed form of all formats. A simple one page of critical information for the reader. Again, very useful because it's the most condensed format and we can quickly go through the essential details that we want to look at. And finally, the longest one, which is a policy paper, which takes the longest to write out of all the other three evidence products we have here. And a policy paper is longer and gives detailed information. So all of you who selected the third option, you are correct. The order is as you see on the screen right now. Now, really getting into the details of what is synthesis. You'll see that whenever you are trying to make sense of the data or the information that you have collected, there is a certain process or order of actions that you follow. And that's what we have mentioned here, that it's a process of ordering, recalling, retelling, and recreating into a coherent whole. You will take different pieces of information from different sources, you will put them together, and it's that whole process wherein you try to make sense of that information and you turn it into data. It, as I'm saying, it brings together different information in new ways and helps to interpret it. You will find that if you if we were to look at a simple example of the gig workers in India and how to provide social security to the platform workers or the gig workers. So we'll see that we'll collect information from different sources. Yes, it could be information from the civil society organizations, the think tanks, the government of India. You collect all of those and then you try to bring all that information together in a way that you seem suitable and appropriate. And then you try to interpret from your own understanding of the data and try to synthesize it in that manner. It enables you to provide background, explore causes and effects. Now, these are again going further deeper into data and try to understand that how can you use this data to support or refute your argument. Your argument could be your recommendation, your policy issue, your policy question. How do you use the data to really give a holistic picture of the synthesis element of that entire information? It can also be a part of consolidating summaries of several sources, as I pointed out earlier. And it is a very nice way to take many pieces of information, try to put that together, and then make sense of it. That you just read it and you will know that we'll also have an exercise about this later. But the idea in definition, in essence, is that it will give you more than one opinion because you are taking the information from multiple sources, and that helps you in defending your research, supporting your research, and helps build understanding of the policy issue that you are writing about. Now, when you hear of the word synthesis, let's hear from you that what comes to your mind when you think of it. We have already given the definition, that is a very technical definition, but when you hear it, what are the words that come to your mind? You can either drop it in the chat or unmute yourself and share with us.
Pulling things together.
Putting things together, right? Okay, Ryan says analyze. Coherency, yes, that's one aspect. Shane says bring together and analysis. Okay, it's a combination of all of these steps that we take up when we synthesize data. Main points, organize information and data in points. Okay, lovely. Yes, that's precisely what we do when we synthesize data and what we just saw in the previous slide. Now, when we go into the details of synthesizing the information, we also find that we need to study about the policy options in place already. Now, why is that important? Because you need to conduct a critical analysis of the evidence. For instance, the example that we were just talking about a couple of minutes ago, the social security of platform workers in India. Now, what if social security systems are already present, except their implementation falls weak, or that its targeting or its reach is very limited? In that case, my question cannot be that how do we establish social security or social protection for gig workers in India, because it's already existing. So the idea of analyzing evidence is also critical, where you have to look at the policy options. We also see one more example here, that suppose you want to propose policy solutions for tackling a problem, say it is minimum wage. So you need to have a good understanding of the current policy and why it's not working. And you also need to show a strong evidence on other policy options, explaining clearly that why these are likely to work compared to the current options. So the idea is that you already have a very broad and a very wholesome understanding of why your recommendations are to be given importance. And for that, analyzing other policy options are very important. Um, Again, going back to the same example, that what if uh, one case is that the social security or social protection is already present in the context of India. Now, that could be one case where my question on establishing it may not be very relevant or may not even be deemed suitable because it's already there. So my policy brief will not be in a position to answer that question. Now, that is one case. The second case would be wherein instead of having a social protection, which is quite universal for the national demography, for the whole of population, what if instead of that, there could be certain other legislative reforms that could be brought about, wherein the employers ensure that social protection for the workers through pension or through other benefits. So that is the second option. So my policy brief will have to address that, yes, this is a policy option, but what I am suggesting is better for so and so reasons. So that is where analyzing other policy options or opportunities is very important. And that is why your policy brief will be more robust in nature, wherein the different sides of the arguments are being addressed by the evidence that you are using. Now we'll see that how do you really synthesize. The first step in this process will be to identify, uh, which means that the role of a synthesis in your writing, as well as the kind of information readers will need. So when you are synthesizing, this is also something that we have talked about before when we were doing the 6 search strategy steps, that Within that, the first step was to familiarize yourself with the topic. So this is quite similar to that, that you have to be very sure of the kind of information that you're looking for. What is the information that your readers are going to need? Because whenever you are drafting your policy brief, one thing that you have to keep in mind is that who are you writing this brief for? Who is your audience? Who are the stakeholders that you want to address this brief to, or who will you be sharing this brief with so that they can act upon those recommendations? And that is why identification of that kind of information is very critical. Next, you decide on your sources, again, a part of the search strategy, that you start to um, finalize your sources, the map that we discussed on Monday, that how is your mapping of sources going to look like, and you put all of those ideas that you gathered from those sources into one place and have a summary of each, wherein you try to pick points which are relevant to your policy question and all those important ideas in one place. Next, focus. By deciding on the purpose of your synthesis and draft a summary of your conclusions about how the sources relate. So you will find that once you have gathered all the information, there are different elements that are interconnected, right? If you are talking about a certain topic, which is, say, minimum wage, and you have different sources mapped out. So you speak with them, somebody talks about compliance, that this is an area that you should look into, that the enforcement of compliance is very important. The other person might tell you that social dialogue in deciding the minimum wage is very important. So what you do is that you decide the purpose of your synthesis, what is it that you are trying to answer through your policy question, and then you begin to slowly move towards synthesizing what you need. But for that, you will have to think and think a lot about what you know about these important ideas. Can you add something that the authors have not mentioned? Because remember that your idea of the policy brief and the recommendation has to stand out from the other evidence products. Otherwise, it will only be a repetition of the solutions that you are offering. What are your own ideas about the information, and what observations can you make about this information? Now, this is wholly your product, right? This is how you put together all the information and how do you interpret it. That is a very critical element of your policy brief, that how do you look at the issue? What are the different types of sources that you bring into it? And what argument are you trying to present in order to support your point? Next, you begin to arrange. You select a sequence that first I'm going to talk about the minimum wage concept. What does it mean? Why is it important? What is the significance of it? And then slowly move towards the issues and challenges and how those can be looked into. So that sequence of the policy brief has to begin happening in your head, at least mentally. You can have that mental arrangement that this is how you're going to arrange all the pieces of information. You will also see that while you are writing your policy brief, there will be a lot of back and forth. You will find new information, and you might find that what you have been choosing as your main source, now that is being replaced, and rather you are going to reorganize the information in a different way. Now, that is completely fine, because the more you are doing research on a given topic, you will keep on finding new pieces of information all the time. I mean, that's a given. And the one thing to remember is that to be patient, because you may not be able to use all sources of information because of the limitation of the word limit. We'll also come to that a policy brief ideally should be 2000 words long. So for that, you'll have to be mindful that which evidence is relevant to me and which evidence should I really give priority to. So that's how the arrangement might change as you go through the process. Once you have this mental arrangement in place, next is to write. Draft your synthesis, combine your summaries of the sources about the conclusions that you have made, and then combine them in one summary. And that is where you will begin to give shape to your policy brief. Next important part is how do you visualize? You will realize that whenever you are reading a report or an article, as for me, I really prefer going through a very nicely visualized graph of certain data points because it just gives a very clear picture of how the trend looks like. You know, it could be an upward sloping uh, line chart, or it could be different types of chart, but I'll get a very nice view, nice understanding without having to go through that long report or paragraph in the newspaper or elsewhere. That is where you also have to come in and ask yourself that how can I take the bunch of information that I have selected so far and how can I visualize this? And that is where you will realize that the diagrams are especially helpful tools for synthesizing data. Now, it could be a nice table, or it could be a nice graph, it could be a box, because if there is a certain best practice that you want to highlight from a different country, for example, you can always have a box which is having a different color in the background than the rest of the policy brief so that it is highlighted in your uh, draft. Next part is revising and rewriting. This is again for you all, it's going to come in the, I think, towards the end of May. Could also be in the first week of June when you are finalizing your draft. And revising, rewriting, it all comes as a part of it, wherein the more number of times that you go through your policy brief, the more you will realize that what are the areas that you can improve your draft upon. And finally, document. Indicate clearly the sources for your synthesis using a standard style of documentation. For this, we'll provide you a template, so there's nothing to worry about. We have already shared the other policy briefs that have been published on the ILO website. So you are very welcome to go through those and look at the documentation and finally do the same for your own policy brief. Now, this is one way to look at how your synthesis should be. Sorry. So you will see that in order to have a compelling and concise synthesis, there are certain points that you have to look at. And this is not only true for synthesis, by the way. Even if you are delivering a presentation at your workplace, these tips are also applicable for that. So you'll see that the 4 points written over here, first one is that you simplify the complex. It's very easy to speak in technical terms, use the jargons of the background that we come from. I have studied economics, and there's usually this saying that goes around that it's overly technical for a reason because, you know, we do not want others to understand our messages that clearly or that simply. But the fact remains that if we were to put an effort into making it simple and break it down into very simple and easy steps, it's quite doable. And it only shows our understanding of how we perceive our own policy issue. So the idea is that you take your technical issue. Now, for a reader, for a layman, uh, reading perhaps about the green jobs or green transition could be very technical and very distant. The person might not be able to appreciate the importance of policy issue. That is where, as an author, as a writer, you come in, wherein you have to simplify and make it very clear in very short and simple ways that why is your policy question so important? How do you relate that to the everyday life of the people for whom the policy brief is written for? Which is where even facts and stories come into place, that personal touch, that why is this topic important to you. We'll also cover more on storytelling in one of the other modules that we have planned for you, which will be next week or in the last week of May, which is communicating evidence, which Naren will be leading, and he does it excellently well, wherein you will hear different stories from him and you'll find out that how do you communicate the evidence in a way that people are really engaged in it. people are really compelled to look at your synthesis, to read your policy brief, take out the time, and really understand that why these recommendations are important. And again, the main messages of the policy brief, in very simple terms, is that first you highlight the problem, that what is the issue that you're trying to bring to the forum. Second, you provide evidence that what is the data saying, whether qualitative or quantitative, you use a mix of both, and you try to come to your own conclusions for the cause and effect, that what is causing this problem and how can this be resolved. That is where the third part comes into play, recommendation. What is your policy brief trying to address and in what ways? And that is what we'll talk about next. So over here, we have an example of synthesis. I would request a volunteer to please read this. You'll also see that we have shared this on the reading materials on eCampus. You can go through that entire report. It's a systematic review. So this is just one of the examples that we have taken up. And maybe once we go through it, we read it, we'll realize that what a synthesis really looks like. Now I'll request any participant to volunteer and have a read at it. Anyone interested? It looks very technical. Maybe we can divide left and right. One volunteer could take up the left one, and we could have the second one take up the right. Anyone for left? It looks
Sure.
shorter.
I can grab the left one.
Sure, Lucas, go ahead.
According to Godiat al., flexible work arrangements are also known as flexible time, which refers to working hours with no constraints in a work environment. Chen and Fulmer also pointed out that employees can decide when and where they work by having flexible work options, allowing them to balance their work and personal obligations. Work design and processes such as flexible time, telecommunications or teleworking, work sharing, and various temporary work contract arrangements can make flexible work. Sorry, the text is jumping around for some reason. Can make flexible work arrangements. This is making it really hard to read. I'm not sure why it's jumping around. Okay, let's try this. Can make work arrangements relevant. In the 1960s, Christelle Kammerer proposed the concept of flexible working arrangements to solve problems related to family obligations and working hours. It was found that employee performance can be improved by flexi time, as it can boost productivity by balancing work and family responsibilities. According to Cannon and Elford, globalization studies in FWAs focus on global trends that lead to a higher demand for flexible work arrangements, such as socio-demographic changes, technological advances, and global business operations.
Thank you. Thanks, Lucas. Sure, go ahead.
When looking for a job, 92% of millennials assume this is prioritize flexibility. While 80% of women and 52% of men want flexibility in their future careers. Hussein observed that many organizations have started to accept Malaysia's new work system as it starts to become endemic today. Moreover, among the other issues are ensuring that FWA's policy is for all employees and that the system is fair. Shari and Amirul stated that Malaysia is still in the early stages of implementing and improving flexible work arrangements. Hence, the number of local studies on FWAs is low and limited. In Malaysia, most research on flexible work arrangements focuses on human resources, industrial organization, psychology, and management, but there's little research on flexible work arrangements, rules, and policies. Subramaniam et al. Also found that very few Malaysian organizations have introduced flexible work arrangements, FWAs, although Many multinationals are quite happy to emphasize this workplace reform. Teleworking, flexi time, permanent, part-time, working from home, and career breaks are the most frequent types of flexible work arrangements in Malaysia.
Thanks a lot, Colin. Thanks, Ruckus. All right. So what we see here is that we have different sources from which different key points have been taken, and they've been put together in a certain order to come to a conclusion. And that is precisely what synthesis is all about. You take different sources, you take the key points that are supportive of your policy issue, policy question, and you arrange them in an order wherein you can come to a conclusion. So over here, we read about flexible work arrangements in Malaysia, the different researchers who have studied it, what are their findings, and different time frames as well. You will see that it doesn't go. I think the last is 2015. There is no study that's been taken up that's prior to 2015. So that timeliness aspect is also taken care of, wherein the findings remain relevant even in today's time. So this is just an example. This is also a systematic review example that we have put on eCampus. So you can also go ahead and read that. Now, very quickly, we'll see the difference between summary and synthesis. Summary is very basic reading or writing technique, which pulls together information to highlight the key points. And it's in a way reiterating the information, which could be a little different from synthesis, wherein you come to your own conclusion and you try to use different sources to come to the point that you want to deliver in your evidence product or your policy briefs. It shows that what original authors had written and addresses only one article at a time. You will not find that a summary is written for 2 to 3 different articles or reports in one writing. You will find 3 separate summaries for 3 separate papers. It presents a cursory overview, and it's just that you go through it and you'll get a very nice overall understanding of what the article is trying to portray. Synthesis, on the other hand, is very advanced level of reading or writing technique. Systematic review, what we read in the previous slide, and I'm sure many of you have also written, you have conducted systematic reviews, literature reviews, whenever you are doing your research at your workplace, or even in colleges, there are usually these research products that you have to work on in your dissertation. So all of that is advanced technique wherein you try to take different sources and you pull together information to draw your own conclusion. It combines and contrasts from different sources, as we have been talking about, and reflects your own knowledge about the original author's writing and makes sure that you are writing something new about it, which is where you come into the picture, that how are you synthesizing the information and what is new about it. Combines different parts and elements from a variety of sources and focuses on main ideas and details to achieve a new insight. So, this is just a difference that we have put together between summary and synthesis so that you know that when you are synthesizing the evidence that you have already searched for, appraised, you do not end up falling in the trap of summarizing what you have read. It's very important that you synthesize it and bring forward your own ideas so that it generates new insights into the policy question. While you are doing that, it's critical that you avoid plagiarism. All of us know that there are, the way we have AI checkers these days, we have had plagiarism checkers since the longest time. It is illegal and an indicator of low professionalism, something that we all know about. So it's just customary that we have put this slide here, that you try to paraphrase, put the text in your own words, but do not take the entire text as it is and then paste it in your policy brief. If you want to take, if, for example, you feel that one of the authors have really, really done a good job at making a conclusion or stating an insight. What you can do instead is that you can take word to word, but also quote it and cite it. You'll see that for many research papers, there are a number of citations. This is something we did on Wednesday, that how do you assess the credibility of that report or an article? You look at the number of citations. So go ahead and use that option. You can take the word as it is, but you can cite that you are using this particular report or this particular study. Now, before we move on to the next part of this presentation, let's just quickly go through this poll. This is the last poll of this session, wherein we look at the differences between summary and synthesis, and you will just have a poll pop up and you will have to read the statements and decide which ones are true and which ones are false. Vincenzo, could you find it? Yeah, okay.
I was just waiting for participants reading all the questions. That's why I was not launching
Oh,
it.
okay. I think it's already there in the
Okay.
pop-up. I think so, yeah. Yes. So you see that there are 4 statements, and you'll have to select true or false for all of them separately. For the first one, majority says true. For the second one, also true. Third is majority says false. And fourth is also true. All right. We have 18 responses. We can end the poll now. Okay, so let's find out what are the answers. The first one is actually true. Well done. A good summary rephrases the main ideas from a single source in your own words. Second is false. Most of you found this to be true. I see why that could be confusing. I'll just read it out. Synthesis involves taking information from multiple sources. Till that point, it is correct. That's true. And presenting a completely new argument. Now, that is where it is false. Why is that? Because, yes, you take different information pieces from different sources, correct? But when you are presenting an argument is very much related and in line with the sources that you present. In the last example that we saw for flexible working arrangements in Malaysia, you will see that the author has taken different sources, but you can already feel when you are reading that the author is trying to come to a point and using different sources to support his argument, not to present a completely new argument. So the difference is that you have to present your idea, your insight that can be new, that what is your take on it, but it does not present a completely new argument that these are the 10 sources that say so and so, but I completely refute or I completely disagree with all of these authors and reports. That is not something that synthesis tries to do. If you have an argument like that, you will also select sources that support your argument. So that is the key difference, and probably why a majority of you thought that this is true. Now, the third one, when synthesizing information, you can directly copy sentences. We know that's false. A well-written synthesis can include both summarizing key points from sources and your own analysis. Right. That's true. Okay. Now I see it's already 3 o'clock. Before going into this section, maybe we can take a break for 5 minutes. Vincenzo, what do you think?
Sure, indeed, we are perfectly on time for a brief break of 5 minutes. Is it okay for you? Maybe we can have 5 minutes now, and I would suggest to have further 5 minutes before the application session, so we can also recharge our energy.
Sure, yeah, sounds good. Yeah. Naren, what do you think?
Yeah, sure, great. Have a break now and then come back after.
Okay, I didn't receive any suggestion for putting on music, so I will go on my own. No suggestion. Okay, you still have, let's say, 10 seconds if you want to suggest something in the chat. Otherwise, I will declare the break open and we will reconvene in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. 5 minutes went by really quickly. We are back and let's directly dive into what is the policy recommendation and what makes it actionable. So very simply, it's a written policy advice. That's how you can look at a policy recommendation. It is the main product of the work of senior officials to create and who administer public policy, and also something that you will be working on in your policy brief. So remember, whenever you are drafting, policy recommendation is the, like how we say, the meat of the evidence product is your policy recommendation. That is the most important part. You can say that's the main product actually that you draft, that you produce in your draft. So one of the examples that as a recommendation, those unemployed should be reskilled within the first 6 months to work in the IT industry to reduce increasing unemployment. So this is just one of the recommendation examples. Requires business, trade unions, and governments to establish representative committees with defined responsibilities for monitoring, promoting equal pay for equal work value. Now, this is again um, another recommendation wherein they say that that committee has to be established wherein the three parties come together, business, trade unions, and government, and define the roles and responsibilities. So these were just two examples. Now, before writing recommendations, we are coming back to policy option, and why understanding those policy options is the first step that you all should take before actually writing down your policy recommendation. So when you are making a specific recommendation, you should know that what is the current situation, what is working, what is not working, and you should also have the evidence for other policy options before you add yours. Again, the example that we were looking at before, that if the social protection program is already existing, it does not make sense to write a policy brief about establishing one. And if it exists already, but there are enforcement challenges, implementation challenges, then you should know that what parts are working and what parts are not working, and you should have the evidence to back it up. This type of analysis can improve the recommendations you propose and give them credibility. Again, as we have been speaking about it, that for you to have a very well-rounded policy brief, you need to address the counter arguments or competing recommendations that allows you to make your policy brief very strong and solid. So how do you develop those? How do you develop actionable recommendations which can both be implementable, feasible, and also for the government stakeholders to address or pay attention to? So the first part is that you have to explain and convey the urgency of the issue. This is something that you will address right at the beginning of your policy brief, that what is the background against which your policy question is being set at. If it is youth unemployment, then you already convey that why this is an issue. how much of GDP is the country losing out on every single year, every single quarter, if the youth is unemployed in large numbers? So that is how you convey the urgency that why is it really important. Second, you go ahead and present your policy recommendation that these are the solutions that you have come up with, given the evidence that you already have, and you support your reasoning in support by using the evidence that you have come across, and why these recommendations, these 3 to 4 recommendations, are the best way forward. Why this and why not any other solution is what you will have to demonstrate. And lastly, you point the reader to additional resources. This is again something that you can mention towards the end of your policy brief in your section of bibliography or your references. You'll see that at the end of every policy brief that is also published online, you'll see the list of sources that the writer has referred to. Now, we will see that how does the structure look like for the policy brief in the next slide. But before that, let's look at the key functions that why policy brief, when you prepare it, how can it be most useful in terms of having the highest impact? That if you are putting in the time, the effort, the energy, the passion, then how do you ensure that it is also delivered effectively? So the impact of your policy recommendation partly depends on how well the issue and arguments are described. As we were speaking about in the previous slide, that it has to be in a way that it establishes the urgency. It takes into account that it's also visually appealing. You would remember the one slide on compelling and concise synthesis. So you'll have to make sure that it's visually appealing. There are different diagrams. There are different charts, different data points, different sources, and it's also concise in a way that it's not a research paper. It cannot be that long. It has to be maximum of 4 to 5 pages and up to 2000 words. This way, it is quick to read and easy to understand, and you are also able to deliver on the different parts of the policy brief appropriately. Now, another part that you have to make sure is that it is relevant to operational work. Whoever you are writing the policy brief for, that whether it's for the Ministry of Labor and Employment, whether it's for Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, it is written in a way that the content is immediately useful and it is relevant to the work that they do in the present day, so that they can just take out those recommendations. They just have a quick read as a policymaker, as a politician, as a leader. They have a quick read and they know in that very instance that this is what they can do with it. This is the solution that they can implement or they can uh, adapt to in order to make the policy more effective. Now, uh, it has to be very clear, accessible, key messages, and references to allow readers to follow the presentation later. Now, there's also another point that you could also mention details about the evidence context, that which countries and regions do particular findings relate to. Now, this point may not be applicable to those who are only conducting a research on their own country and not taking any best practice examples from other countries. For them, they need not look into this point wherein they have to look into the relevance factor of that particular finding because they have only focused on their domestic research. Now, the most important slide of today's session, that how do you structure your policy brief? You might want to take a snapshot of this. I'm sure many of you have already also taken that. Now we'll go through this one by one, after which I'll show you an example on the ILO website that how has that person structured their policy brief. And we will also have a very nice activity followed by these slides, wherein all of you together will also draft a policy brief. Um, Not to scare you, it's going to be different parts that a group will only focus on introduction, other group on results, and then finally on recommendations. Not that individually you'll have to come up with the whole policy brief, but definitely something that you will be doing by the end of this training program. 31st of May is our last session, after which we'll be sharing a date with you on which you'll have to share your policy brief with us. But all of that for later. Right now, let's get back to the structure. The first part is executive statement, which roughly takes about 10% of your draft and includes a brief overview of all the parts of a policy brief. But one thing to remember, this is always written in the last. This is something that you just cannot anticipate the moment you start writing. It has to come as a last part. When you are done with all the other sections, you come back and then you draft your executive statement, taking key points from the different sections of your policy brief. And it's very short. It's roughly about 10% of the brief. Second is introduction, 10 to 15% again. It highlights the importance of the issue, the whole situation around that issue, um, gives a brief overview of the conclusions or the direction of the rest of the brief. So, as you would know, it's more like a background. You are setting the context that why this issue is important and how can you use it in favor of your policy question. The third is methodology. It's again probably the shortest part of your policy brief, which is roughly 5 to 10%, wherein you use this section to establish your credibility of the brief by talking about what are the different kinds of findings or sources that you have come across and how have you arrived at it. That why I mean, what process is it that you followed to come up with the structure that you have for your policy brief. For example, in the methodology, many participants in the past have mentioned that they have used different set of research papers. They have also used their own personal experience accounts to talk about the policy question. They also talk about their experiences, say at working at a ministry in their country. So, what are the steps that they have followed in the research, and how does that relate to the findings or the recommendations that you have arrived at? So, this is typically a part wherein you establish your credibility, that a reader would know that how are these conclusions decided upon. Now, it also says that you can sometimes omit this or restrict it to one sentence. We would say that you should definitely have a methodology section because it elaborates on the process that you have followed, the method that you have followed. But yes, you can feel free to limit it to one sentence or two sentences. That's completely fine. Now, the other part, the next part is results and conclusions. It is the section of the policy brief where you talk about data. You talk about tables, you have your graph, charts to demonstrate what are the findings, what are the facts, and you construct it around in a way that it automatically leads up to the recommendations that you're providing. For example, if your policy brief is on child labor, in results and conclusions, your information could be around how serious or to what extent child labor is prevalent at the moment and what are its further second order effects on the uh, population as a whole. So you can look at this section in a way that you structure it leading up to the policy recommendations, that these are the issues, these are the challenges right now. The enforcement could be a problem. The political will or intention could be a problem. There could be multiple issues. And then you lead it up to the next section, which is the main component of your policy brief, which is recommendation. That now that you have set the context, you have your issues highlighted. Now, what do you do about it? And that is where recommendations come in, which are supposed to be very direct and clear suggestions, simply written policy advice, as we saw in the previous slide, that what can be done? What are the solutions to reduce child labor in your country? What are the 3 or 4 different steps that can be taken up? It could be social dialogue, it could be setting up a committee with key stakeholders, it could be legislative reform. It could be all of those. So that is what the solution is about. And finally, you end your policy brief with references and useful resources wherein you can direct the readers to go through these different reports and articles, different resources that you came across, and then they can look up more information. Now, these are just 4 different uh, parts that you can use when you are planning a policy brief. We have just given a few examples of how you can draft it. You see that on the first, which is identifying the purpose and overarching message of the brief, you'll see a short example that the objective for this brief is to dash. You have to use an action verb. Is it to convince the Minister of Employment? Is it to inform the relevant stakeholders? What is the target audience? Is it the Minister of Finance? And then what do you want as an outcome to come through? That what should happen? Should they increase the funds for social protection or what else? So all of these steps can be outlined in the different steps that you take. I'll also share an example at this moment. I hope all of you can see my screen here. That's changed now. The topic over here is protecting migrant workers in Maldives by Shahida. So you'll see on the left, there is an executive summary, quite a short one, about 10% of the brief. And on the right, we see introduction. So you will see that in Maldives, then you see a few numbers that how many migrant workers are there, to what number it has increased in 2020, and how does the context of the problem looks like. You'll see that she's still setting up the context when she says that it's a large part of a majority of the workforce, and so and so. After which we come to the next section, which is background. Now she has divided introduction and background. You can feel free to merge the two. That's not an issue. Over here, she has given another aspect of the issue wherein she is speaking about the amendments that have been brought about for implementation. So again, what are the updates? When was it passed? And what are the regulations right now? She dives deeper into policy process that uh, she has given examples that what are the different issues surrounding migrant workers, and then uh, given a few examples from the immigration department of Maldives and so and so. And finally, she comes down to the recommendations that what is it that Maldives government requires to do. You can read this later. You will find this on the ILO website. It will be accessible. And then finally, the recommendations. You'll see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 recommendations. But typically, we recommend having 3 to 4 of them, not more. And you can go ahead and expand on the 3 to 4 recommendations that you come across. That is one of the ways that you can follow. And fourth is references. You'll see that the links are also provided, and anyone who is more interested can go into this. Okay, so now back to our slide deck. These are again some elements that we have put together for your review, that these are the different parts of a policy brief that are usually there. We highly recommend using graphics, tables, photographs to make the content very engaging. And this would also help the reader to understand in a very interactive manner that what is the extent of the issue. You can also read more on eCampus. You'll find different supporting documents talking about the same issue. This is an assignment. You will find a worksheet. This will also be on eCampus, wherein you will have to synthesize your findings and write your actionable recommendations as a next step so that you can finally get down to drafting your policy brief. For your assignment, you will see that there are a bunch of articles that we have put together from Philippines, South Africa, Jamaica, TNT. So the idea would be to We have changed the question a little. You do not have to summarize the articles. You will see that the question is already updated on eCampus. That you'll only have to go through these bunch of articles and synthesize on how to tackle youth unemployment in your country. So I hope you all find time over the weekend to work on this. And lastly, for today, oh, sorry. Okay, I think I'll just share the different slide deck which has the activity. Just a second.
Yeah, while Bhavika is trying to sort out, thank you for your engagement. I think the assignment, I'm just coming to the assignment here. We have provided maybe 5 or 6 newspaper articles from South Africa, Philippines, Trinidad, Jamaica, nice pieces about how to tackle youth unemployment. And I think one of the pieces that was given to you, the youth unemployment puzzle in Trinidad. Using all these pieces of information on that particular topic, try to see what you can propose in terms of answering the question of how you can tackle youth unemployment in your country, and just try to start writing. I mean, they're fantastic pieces there we found from different newspapers. Okay, so it's a good exercise on how to synthesize and what Bhavika was talking about. Over to you, Bhavika.
Sure, I've found the yeah, I have it. Just a second, sharing it. Okay, so what we'll do today, as a group, we'll try to address one policy question and draft a policy brief. Again, no writing. It's just that we'll speak and share our thoughts and ideas, and together as a group, come up with the content of this policy question, which is a fictional one. There is no country called Mazaland, but just a fictional touch to it, that how to support workers' transition to a remote and hybrid work environment post pandemic in Mazaland. So apparently, there's also a pandemic in Mazaland. And since we have all been through this situation in 2020, 21 about this transition to a remote and hybrid work model, which I'm sure most of us have had troubles transitioning to. And right now, we'll try to come together as a group and try to answer that in the policy brief. Just a quick background to Mazaland. Again, fictional, just giving that disclaimer that Mazaland is a middle income country with a diverse economy, experienced a rapid shift to remote work during the COVID-19 pandemic. As businesses adapted to this new reality, the government of Mazaland is now exploring policies to support workers' transition to a sustainable remote and hybrid work environment. This transition presents both opportunities and challenges that require a thoughtful and evidence based policy response. There are also some fictional accounts for the statistics that all of you can use. We have done that homework for you. So you can just take these statistics and use it in your argument. You will see that there are 3 key issues that we are trying to address. The first is the inconsistent internet connectivity and access to digital tools. Again, some metrics on the percentage of households that have reliable internet access and report having adequate technology or not, or the lack of it. The second issue is challenges in maintaining work life balance and addressing mental health concerns. Um, and how many workers have been reporting to work longer than they did pre pandemic. And they have expressed concerns about the lack of social interaction. And lastly, adapting labor laws to address the nuances of remote and hybrid work. So it's labor rights and regulations. That is the part that it's addressing. I would request you all to take a screenshot of this. Otherwise, even I will share this on the chat when you are divided in the breakout rooms. Now, what you will have to do is that there are going to be 4 groups. The first group is going to write the introduction, provide a very brief overview of the issue using the statistics that we have provided. or not. That's completely up to you, how you understand the introduction part. And what are the key terminologies that are relevant to the issue? What is it that the reader should absolutely know before getting into it? Second group will talk about the justification, that why is this issue important to support workers' transition, that why is it really urgent to be addressed to a remote and hybrid work environment. The third is evidence. Um, this group is going to focus on providing the set of indicators or reports which will be used to illustrate the extent of the issue, and or again a choice, give examples from other countries that have successfully addressed the transition, and those could be highlighted as best practices. The fourth group is going to talk about policy recommendation, wherein you develop 3 to 4 detailed recommendations for addressing the key areas, the key three issues that we have pointed out. So I'm guessing that since all of you are addressing one part, let's keep it to 10 minutes. Right now, we have about 25 minutes before the next session. So we would like to have a 5-minute break before we start for the next one at 4. So let's keep it to 10 minutes breakout room discussion, followed by a 10-minute policy brief presentation, wherein um, group by group in the similar order, you can go ahead and at the end of it, we'll have a very nice policy brief content ready. So that's the idea. We are hopeful about it. Hopefully you have taken the screenshots. Please take a snapshot of this slide as well before you move into your breakout rooms. And if you have any questions, we'll be there. Naren and I'll be there entering the rooms at different times for you to help you, assist you in any way possible. Um, and I'll also try to post these two on the chat in case anybody is unable to do that. All right. So with that, let's move to the
Okay.
different breakout
I'm going,
rooms.
I'm going to open the rooms now. So we're going
Just a
to
minute,
please.
Vincenzo, just a second. So that you are all on board. Thank you, Bhavika. About this exercise, it's extremely simple. If you had followed Bhavika's slides where she was talking about planning a policy brief, you can just see the slide that was just planning a policy brief. It's just like filling the gaps. For me, it's like filling the gaps, right? For example, the introduction is the easiest part. The objective of this policy brief is to convince or inform the decision makers or your minister to have some legislative framework in my country on flexible working hours, whatever, because there is so many people working from home, etc., and based on the COVID pandemic, you can tell a nice story. On the recommendation side, it's you can be very specific based on the analysis that you have provided above in the policy brief. Here are a few options. Number one, create a committee to look into the teleworking arrangements, provide some resources, have social dialogue mechanism in place, consult the business community, develop the infrastructure, etc. It's extremely easy. And those on the logical providing background, you provide what is happening globally and at the country level. This is the trend for the future of work, and this something has to be done right now. If no, you will miss the boat. So it's extremely easy in terms of the flow. If you had followed the arguments, it's like filling the blanks. All right? Claro? Good. Vincenzo, Bhavika, over to you.
Okay, so I've created 4 rooms. You have 10 minutes, and we will reconvene so at 4:37 Central European Time Zone. Please join the room.
Thanks, Vincenzo. Okay, I see there is some debate around the time. It really flew by. But hopefully, whatever we have right now, let's just discuss that. doesn't have to be too technical, might be incomplete as well. That's completely fine. But let's just get the pieces together and try to discuss it later. So, first up, we have group one to talk about the introduction. So, over to you, Andre.
So just a quick context of the introduction. One of the first challenges we had in designing the introduction was whether this was a technology issue or a worker protection issue, because we were trying to decide how we would ground it. I think we agreed that it was primarily a worker protection issue. We felt that that was the most important thing that the policy had to do, and that the issue of technology was enabling and had to be seen in the context of how it affected workers' rights. So our introduction, because we were quite surprised when the 60-minute timer came up, um, our introduction would be to focus on how do you protect workers' work-life balance? How do you protect workers' rights? And I think that's where we got to.
Okay, that's a
Guys, you want to add anything? Dulcie, Detra?
No, I think you covered it, Andre. As you said, we thought the main issue would have been anchored in the labor rights and regulations aspect of it, and then everything else, as far as, and then providing that enabling environment with technology and so on would follow.
Yeah, that's a great start. It's up to interpretation because there are three different issues, and we'll talk about that in detail if we have time towards the end. But let's see how the other groups try to interpret the same information. Over to group two.
Thanks, Bhavika. Colin, yeah, representing group two. In terms of looking to the justification and explaining why it's important to support the workers' transition to a remote and hybrid work environment, we took it from the worker protection perspective and placed it in that context. And a number of issues were raised, first being looking at the evolution of workers' needs due to the whole pandemic. And in the evolution of the needs, you need to adjust and amend because new needs would have arisen for workers. So it was important for us to put it in that context. Additionally, we discussed that the need to look at remote work, especially as it applies to work-life balance and mental health for workers. So one of our colleagues, Shane, from Jamaica, indicated that a study showed that they are conducting in Jamaica right now that most workers do not want to return, to the workplace. And of course, in that sense, having a greater appreciation for the work-life balance and also those mental health issues that would, impact how you should consider and why you should consider and support, workers' transition to that more remote and hybrid work environment. And Narendra indicated that in the paragraph presented, or I should say the text presented, 50% of employees expressed concerns about returning to work, and 55% also indicated longer work hours. So there's where we pull our statistical and empirical evidence and to show that they need to support. Also, we discussed a need really to update labor standards and regulations to provide for those new working arrangements. And it's important that, as the working arrangements have been adjusted, updating those labor standards and regulations, that is important because it's a new work environments. They need to be more employee-centric and develop more employee-centric models as the employee shifts towards, always been an important part of the workspace, but the need shifting and different sector issues becoming more important. This was an important point as well. You also discussed the need, why it's important, because social dialogue continues to be put into context. And of course, the social dialogue, particularly employers who would push back on the whole remote and hybrid work environments, it's important to support the worker's voice in that dialogue. So that was important. And we ended our brief 10-minute discussion looking at the inclusivity, and equity lens, looking through that lens for the exploration of these recommendations. So that's how we really summarize it, looking at the entire situation through the inclusivity and equity lens. So that's it from group 2.
Great job. Very evidence-based justification of the policy question. I think that's really great. You've put together all the essential points within the time limit that you had. So that's great. Let's move on to group number 3.
Yes, hello. Good day. So for group 3, well, we were really quite lost when we were starting with the group discussion, but thanks to Naren, we got a few guidance on how we will proceed with our discussion. So for us, we were tasked to provide some evidence on what do you call this? We were asked to provide what indicators or reports that we will use to illustrate the extent of the issue. So for that, we went back to the slide wherein the key issues and statistics were provided. So we saw there that Mazalan is having issues when it comes to their digital infrastructure. So there is inconsistent internet connectivity and access to digital tools, which affects the transition to remote work, remote or hybrid work environment. Also, so there is also the issue of there are challenges in maintaining work-life balance and addressing mental health concerns. So we were provided with statistics like 55% of remote workers report working longer hours than they did pre-pandemic. So this is a problem considering that it seems that the work-life balance of workers are really affected by the pandemic. And then also 50% of employees have expressed concerns about the lack of social interaction and its impact on mental health. And then for the labor rights and regulations, it is said that adopting labor laws to address the nuances of remote and hybrid work is really necessary because of 55% of remote workers are unclear about their rights related to work hours and overtime, and that there are employers that have not yet updated their policies to reflect remote work arrangements. So the group, in trying to find other to support that there is really an issue when it comes to transitioning to remote and hybrid work, we try to find statistics from other countries like countries A, B, and X. And then we saw that in country X, the statistics are not really that high as compared as to Mazalan. So there, the issue is not the issues being experienced by Mazalan. It is not as much as an issue in country X. And then looking further, we find that in country X, they already have this policy when it comes to telecommuting work. So in that from that we can really say that a policy, there is really a need to have a policy on telecommuting work for this statistics to improve the situation, or to improve the transitioning of remote and transitioning to remote and hybrid work. So I think if the rest of the group have other inputs, please just do so. Thank you.
Okay, no further additions. Then this was really brilliant, Group 3. Thank you, Gloria Liza. I know you started off with that you were still, all of you were still lost, but it did not seem like that at all with your answer. And you also came up with fictional case studies, best practices. That's altogether great. That's excellent. Thank you for sharing those ideas. Let's move on with Group 4, the last one, for
Yes.
recommendations.
Yes, hi. So unlike group one, we did not do the disaggregation, whether or not this is a work-life issue, workers' protection issue, or technology issue. We just kind of went based on the data that's presented. But the recommendations we do fall in those two categories. So addressing the issue of workers not having an understanding of their rights, we said that we should have a sensitization campaign, as well as, and then following that, with the protection of rights, we will want to update the labor code with new provisions on the rights of remote work. And in doing that, we will refer to international legal instruments to enforce workers' rights. And with respect to the technology issue, especially with respect to accessibility, we wanted to do subsidies and tax breaks to telecommunication companies to promote internet infrastructure, partnership with companies to give out SIM cards. And then also we wanted to provide technical guidelines to facilitate adoption of new technologies by workers. And overarchingly, we want to also have a committee of remote work transition, just to help guide these policies through. Yeah, so that's it. The only thing is Rokas was pointing out is that these are not very specific as we thought it should be. But I guess the time constraints hinder that on our part. Yeah, so thank you.
No, I think it was quite comprehensive given the information that we had provided. Since all of these are just fictional details and data, it's great how all of you have come up with the other fictional details and how this could be useful when you yourself draft your policy briefs. So thank you all for participating in this. I realized that there were a few gaps. I'll try to address that on the eCampus in the discussion forum in the interest of time. We also have the next speaker for application session. So I'll hand it over to Naren so we can take that forward.
Beautiful. Thank you, Bhavika. And thank you all, everybody, for really drafting your policy brief on teleworking or flexible working arrangements. It's done already 90%. And the other 10% will be written by Bhavika. And then you can see the example of a nice policy brief drafted by all of you. Well done, Andre, Colleen, Gloria, and Christoph. Well done. Thank you. Now I think what we will do now, we'll move to our next session in terms of application session. We have the pleasure of having Marek with us. Marek is in charge of our action program, where he works under the director Mustafa Kamal. he deals with the issue of just transition. And Marek has been with the ILO for a number of years. I have seen him, I've known him. Maybe Marek, thank you very much for giving us your time and come and share your expertise and your wisdom with our participants here. Maybe you could introduce yourself better than what I did, if you can. Marek, the floor is yours now. Please go ahead. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, very much. I think there's no introduction needed. My name is Marek. I'm economist in the so-called Just Transition Action Program. Let me try to share my screen. I think that the topic is more important than myself. Let me see if that works. Do you see the screen?
Yes.
And can you hear me okay?
Yes, all good.
Perfect. So this session will be dealing with just transitions. And in fact, it is coined to be a term in the context of climate change, biodiversity loss.
Marek,
Yeah.
if you could just put the slideshow mode, I don't know whether, or you want to just keep it like that.
On my side, it is show mode. So
no,
I'm
maybe the screen, change the screen. The other screen. No, we see your slides here. It's not on the slide. I mean, the animation mode.
Okay. Could you just indicate how to do it? Because I see on my screen on presentation mode.
Yeah, but it just change the window. Maybe just have a look into which window it's your presentation is.
Okay, let me share.
You okay?
Can you see the screen?
Not yet.
No, not now.
You want that we do the slides for you?
No, I wish to do it myself. Otherwise, we'll be messed up.
You have how many? You have two screen or one screen? Where are you now?
I click on share screen and then it
Which
shows me
screen
on.
are you sharing? Because there may be options of which screen you want to share.
I share the window.
Exactly.
And
that.
now you see the PowerPoint, right?
Now we see the PowerPoint. You got it.
But if I now click on presentation slideshow,
yeah.
Now, do you see?
No, it's on another screen somewhere else, on another window or another screen.
Okay.
Yeah, otherwise, if I would just suggest to zoom in a bit more, and we can keep it like it is, so at least we can have a better view of the presentation. Just keep it as it was before, just zoom in a bit more, and it's fine. I think we all can see the presentation.
If you were just to guide me on how.
Sure. No, my suggestion would be, Marek, just, share the screen as you did before, and we will keep it as it was, just zoom in a bit more.
The other thing that you could try is remove the presenter view, which is usually the thing that doubles the presentation.
Yeah, let's see.
And where do you double the presentation?
On the top, you should, yeah.
You tell me when you see
Yeah,
the entire
otherwise,
screen.
I would suggest to take the easier solution. So just zoom in a bit more on the bottom, and so we can see the presentation also, although it appears to us not in a presentation mode, the presentation view.
Yeah. You still don't see the...
No, we see your presentation, we see your PowerPoint, but we cannot see in a presentation view. That's the only problem. So we can see on your left also the other slides, the next slides. But I mean, I
It's
would
okay.
say, yeah, never mind.
We can see it, yes.
See it indeed. Maybe for those of you who are, you can close the window on the right about participants and meeting chat, so you will have a better view on your screen for the participants. And saying that, I will go ahead. So the floor is yours. I would suggest to start.
Okay, so you see the screen and I just maximize it, right?
Yeah, we can see that. We can see that. Okay, great. It's also better now. Yeah.
It's better?
Yeah, sure.
Apologies for that. Somehow we should have tried it earlier. Zoom is sometimes difficult. So the just transition is about climate change and biodiversity loss and pollution. However, let me introduce you to the Green Jobs Assessment Model, which is to assess the impacts of climate change, biodiversity, and pollution on the economy. So it's economy stupid. Often people remain in the domain of environment and climate change. However, it's a question that implies employment and GDP growth. So let me just mention that there's nothing new with structural change. Here we are looking at beyond coal, charcoal, oil and gas. Charcoal is important here because it's a major source of energy in developing country context. And in fact, we are looking at a classical, in a sense, structural change. Here we see Dubai, which you may know now hosts close to this roundabout, the highest skyscraper in the world. Prior to the discovery of oil in the 60s, that was a fishing village relying on pearl trade. So let me just give you an outline. I present you the Green Jobs Assessment Model as indicated, some properties, data, and structure on how to build it, and then I provide the application as the session is named. So let me start with the model first. Why a model? Because we need to measure the social, economic, and employment outcomes of environmental policies. So again, it's the economy stupid. We want to understand what is the impact of climate policies onto labor market outcomes. And here, unfortunately, it is no longer animated do you see it animated now, or is it still the same?
It's still the same, but I mean, I would suggest to go ahead because we can see that it's...
Yeah, okay. So there are three key indicators. That is the social and the labor market, that is the economy, and that is the environment. So what is the question mark here in the middle is, what is the impact of climate and green policies on, say, the direct, indirect, and induced jobs, on informality, on skills, on gender, on youth? Here, the key question is labor market outcomes. Second comes the economy, obviously GDP by sector. What, for example, is a climate policy in reducing emissions, meaning for GDP in agriculture, GDP in energy? What is the impact on poverty? What is the impact on tax revenues, not to be for oil-producing states, on profits and wages? And eventually, as the objective here is to reduce emissions or to adapt to climate change, what is the impact on forests, waste, energy, CO2 emissions, and other indicators that relate to the environment? So here, the objective of this assessment, and this is why we said it prior to the just transition policies, is to have an evidence on how to maximize job gains and protect losses. So we'll see in a moment, after the properties in the applications, on how policies can be shaped to maximize, in fact, employment outcomes and minimize losses. So first, we need to understand the impacts before designing policies. So first, we look at economic data, right? It's an economic model. Again, policies have an impact on economic outcomes, GDP growth, etc., etc. However, in the domain of economic accounting, in the system of national accounts, the SNA, which is a standard base for GDP estimations at country level, there's no environment. So the international community, the IMF, OECD, World Bank, and others have joined efforts to include in a systematic way the system of environmental accounting into the SNA. So this introduces the environment as a factor of production in economics. So this is what we then do to integrate this data together with decent work and social indicators to integrate this into the system of national accounts. So here, the key indicators of the labor market at the ILO, we have 18. It is unemployment, youth not in education or employment, informal employment, working poverty rate, etc., etc. So these data through labor force surveys are integrated into a single framework. The framework that is provided by Nobel Prize winning Leontiev, input-output or supply and use table, which is a standard nowadays in the system of national accounts, but which you can expand to include, as we see here on the slide on the bottom, which you can extend to employment and emissions. So you have an integrated framework if you harmonize these data in the input-output or supply and use table framework, which makes them consistent. Importantly, here we look at sectors and industries, meaning that we will have estimates on outcomes in agriculture, outcomes in industry, services, at least the one-digit level, that is 20 industries or sectors in the International Standard Classification of Industries. So let me give you just an upshot of the application of this model. Here you can find a publication on youth trends in 2020. We did at the global scale, and we looked at a green versus a conventional growth scenario by 2030. And here on the panel A, you see the impact on GDP, panel B, impact on employment, and C, on emissions. So what we do is we compare a baseline scenario with the green growth recovery plan or a green growth strategy, and you see the results. The green growth strategy foresees investments into productive capital that increases both GDP growth as well as employment while reducing emissions. So again, here people may think of green investments being a cost. However, if those green investments reduce the cost of conventionals while increasing efficiency and productivity in growth outcomes, then the impact can be positive. That's why the title of this presentation is "It's the Economy Stupid," because here we see on the global scale that the green growth strategy is superior due to the productive investments into green technology. Now, at the regional level, we have done an assessment of the MENA region that is particularly contentious because often those countries, they do oppose climate action and green policies as they fear loss of jobs as oil and gas exporting countries. However, we have three scenarios compared to baseline, where we estimate that the climate resilience scenario, the strongest scenario, could create 10 million jobs by 2030. while only 2 million jobs would require restructuring or could be lost. Here, the scenario foresees investments notably in renewable energies, which are as cost effective and could be exported, like green hydrogen from that region, to replace losses in oil and gas revenues. Additionally, we look at power generation and green construction, as well as indirect investments into electrical equipment and other supply industries that are required to make this transition happen. So there are investments into land transport, for example, to transport the panels, say the solar panels, to the desert to install them in terms of construction. So here we see by sector, as I had mentioned, we can analyze employment outcomes by sector. So by scenario, we can see, for example, the green hydrogen sector will create across the region some 2.8 million jobs. The second highest is construction, as I had mentioned, because of its important reliance on building new facilities. And as you know, in economics, construction is the sector where capital investments become productive in the longer term, indicating strong economic growth in the future. Vehicle manufacturing, here we are also looking at some electric manufacturing where additional jobs can be created. Now, in terms of job losses, as this is a highly capital intensive industry, oil and gas losses are minimal. Here you see, even in the strongest scenario, only some 160,000 jobs are lost. Because again, it is a high capital intensive industry, whereas the renewable energy is more into operation and maintenance, supplying industries and so forth. So job losses can be managed and are manageable. So let me come now to the just transition policies. We base those just transition policies on the evidence from the modeling frameworks. This is of utmost importance because we need to understand, and let me go up just 2 slides, we need to understand first the job gains by sector and the job losses, because only then we can design the just transition policies. So here are the guidelines of the just transition that were adopted by the International Labour Conference last year to turn the risk of the transition into GDP growth, job creation, and reduced inequality. So without going into each of those 9 categories, the policy areas, let me unpack some of the key ones. So social dialogue obviously is at the heart of the ILO. Employers and workers must have a say in the design of just transition and climate policies. So here the Presidential Climate Commission in South Africa, which is negotiating with the international community the Just Energy Transition Partnerships, the 8.5 billion that was committed by the European Union, the US and UK, etc. This type of international agreement is based on strong social dialogue. Once the social dialogue is set up, typically from our end, we promote the measuring of just transition impacts for the better policy making. So here is a study at country level in Nigeria, where we did find, and this is a finding across the world, that the social and employment gains, they are not automatic. As I had indicated, there may be 10 million new jobs created across the MENA region. However, in order to create those, skills training is key. Here in Nigeria, there's a very strong case for renewable energy, and supplying industries with a large investment into an economy where energy is lacking, 12 million jobs could be created. But the cost in terms of skills training is some 100 or 96 million per year to train those technicians to install the renewable energies. So in fact, the transition to renewable energy and the creation of the 12 million jobs here in Nigeria hinges on skills training. Now, the same is to reduce emissions from charcoal. I had mentioned charcoal is very important in developing country context, notably in sub-Saharan Africa, where here in Nigeria, some 530,000 workers directly full-time work in charcoal collection and production. They need to switch over to other income, and this we consider as a cost to provide new alternatives. And in the meantime, a conditional cash transfer is required. With the model, we can estimate how much that is. And in fact, it's some 900 million if a basic income is transferred to those workers to stop collecting charcoal and to transition them in trainings and other into new jobs. So at the total cost, this is 1 billion per year, right? To enable a transition. Yeah. You may think of, okay, you forbid the collection of charcoal in the forest. However, if people have no alternative to their income, then they will, despite the ban of charcoal production, for example, they will continue to deforest, they will continue to produce it. The same is for the energy users. If they are not provided with alternatives, this transition will not happen. So accompanying just transition policies are required. And only the modeling allows you to estimate the quantity of workers, the quantity of cost, as well as provide estimations on how to finance this. In Nigeria, the richest 10%, they produce basically 90% of all energy-related emissions because of their high income and their consumption of modern forms of energy. If we were to tax them just a 10-ton $10 per ton, that would bring in 1.06 billion a year. So here we found a solution, a progressive climate tax for the rich to finance the accompanying measures in skills training and conditional cash transfer to the poorer parts of society. So basically, it's a win-win situation, which in addition creates economic growth and employment opportunities. So these are just some industrial policies that could support and are supporting the transition other than, say, social and employment policies. So China, since the 2000s, they have engaged in large-scale subsidies for these three now key industries for China's economic growth: electric vehicles, PV manufacturing, and battery supply. So some 30 billion were invested or subsidized in their own industries over the past 10 years, which made nowadays China the largest electric vehicle exporter in the world. Whereas at the same time, 80% of PV manufacturing and battery supply comes from China. Germany started to catch up only 10 years later. We consider, myself, I'm German, we consider ourselves the Saudi Arabia of car manufacturing with 1.3 million jobs in that sector, but we came late to the table. So only in the 2010s, a finance scheme called the Climate Transformation Fund was provided to match the Chinese subsidy schemes. That is massive amount of money, 177 billion over a 3-year period, to phase out the combustion engine, as well as introducing the new technology, the electric vehicle technology, to the industry. In the US, you may know the Inflation Reduction Act. It's a massive 370 billion tax credit scheme, which the current administration assumes to create 9 million jobs over 10 years. So these are kind of macro and industrial policies, in addition to the social protection policies and the skills policies. Let me briefly give one example of a nature-based solutions that could be classified under social protection, the NREGA, National Rural Employment Guarantee Act in India, which is benefiting some 60 million households to provide 100 days of guaranteed work per year. And this investment is mainly in climate change adaptation. However, climate change adaptation should not be seen as a cost again, but it is an investment into irrigation, into reforestation, which improves the natural capital of those regions to allow, again, agricultural practices, to allow productivity increases in the yields, as well as improved well-being for the populations. So here, the social protection scheme, again, should not be considered a cost, but it is an investment into enabling the just transition. Hence, it is the economy stupid. Right? So skills training, again, if you send your skills children to school, then it is in fact not a cost, but it's an investment. So as I had mentioned, in Germany, we consider that the electric and digital switch over to electric vehicle manufacturing will create some 288,000 jobs, but under the condition that the right skills are imparted to the right workers. So in a partnership with, traditionally with the industry, there's a Faculty 73 program, for example, that is an apprenticeship program. And here you see a picture of someone working on electric vehicles that allows the industry, with the support of government, to train their workers in apprenticeship schemes to make them fit for the electric vehicle transition. Very known is the Graamin Shakti solar system. Today, some 2 million systems are already installed and 150,000 jobs created. You may know those schemes well. So as a conclusion, let me say, if countries stay as bystanders in the global transition with modest or follow other more ambitious countries with modest climate ambition, there are potential losses in jobs and welfare. Why? Because the world, as shown by the US, by China, by Germany, the largest economies in the world, because the world is moving towards alternatives to oil, gas, charcoal, and coal. So as a bystander, again, you may lose losses. But becoming an active driver in the green transition, there is potential with the right policies in place for GDP and job growth. That requires higher ambition in biodiversity and climate. This requires macro and fiscal reform, notably a progressive carbon tax. This is of utmost importance because it is the rich that pollute most, while the poorest suffer most. So the progressivity in the environmental pollution taxation system will allow you to shift the negative externality of the rich consumption patterns, using fiscal revenues neutrally to pay for the transition and investments into the poorer segments of society. And then eventually these funds should be used to train human capital in skills and provide social protection for workers through transition. Now, the last conclusion is that green tech industries are a strategy of diversification which can replace the traditional forms of coal, charcoal, and oil and gas at a higher level of economic and social development. Thank you very much for your attention, and happy to still take a few questions as we start a little late.
Great, Marek. Thank you. Thank you. Great session we had. Really appreciate your time. Quite useful things that you provided us. I'm sure the learners would be very interested to engage with you. Since we are running out of time, what I will do is ask them to pose their questions in our discussion forum, and from there I'll take it to Marek if there is a need. But in any case, let's give a big round of applause to Marek. Thank you very much. Great. Vincenzo, Bavika, I think we are coming to an end for today's session. From my side, I think you guys were very engaged. Well done. Just keep an eye on the assignment and the discussion forum on the eCampus. Next week we'll have more intense discussions. Until then, have a good weekend. Goodbye. I leave you with Bavika and Vincenzo. Thank you, Marek, once again.
Thank you, Naren. Thank you, Marek. Yeah, Bavika, you maybe go first if you want to remind, and if we need to remind anything else in addition to what Naren was mentioning.
Yeah, I think nothing much. It's just the usual points that I repeat at the end of every session. Just to answer Tara's question in the chat, the last PowerPoint, yes, the slide deck that I had shared today on synthesizing, that has also been uploaded on the eCampus, as well as the Just Transition presentation by Marek. And that's all. I think today was quite a heavy session, so I won't keep you all for long. And I'll see you on Monday. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. So we're going to share the PowerPoints, also the one that you were requiring before, including the last one by on Just Transition. Thank you all. So we're going to reconvene on Monday. As always, I kindly ask you to be on time, so we'll be ready to start at sharp 2, so we'll be able to be on time, and also to have more time also for the application session. That's my only request. Having said that, thank you so much, as always, for being so engaged, for discussing, and for providing very insightful reflection. Okay, that's all. Have a nice weekend, and we will reconvene on Monday. Bye.